Hello viewers, Swiftlemer here, and welcome to another Lethal Company video. Today we are going to brainstorm a plot, casting, soundtrack, and many other aspects of what could be an official theatrical cinematic movie based on this phenomenal video game. For those who are not aware, Lethal Company is a massively popular multiplayer indie horror game that was released in October 2023. Within a short amount of time, it has taken the gaming community by storm, drawing in multiple influencers and game builders. The game pits the player into a small ship that can fit up to 4 players. Using this ship, the player will move around an assortment of up to 8 planets of differing ecosystems and hazards. The goal is within 3 days, you have to empty out the abandoned industrial facilities on these planets for salvageable scraps for a company of unknown intent or motives. Every time a quota is met, it gets increasingly harder, requiring you to put more and more of your skills to the test, and more dangerous monsters to dodge as you loot. Eventually, the players will inevitably fail to meet the quota and will be fired via ejection into the cold reaches of space. It keeps the player on their toes at all times and keeps them focused. With such a praised formula for a game, some individuals may have thought by now how a cinematic interpretation would play out. Using the details we know, we can loosely put together details along with new details to keep items fresh and to help connect aspects that would not tie well together otherwise. So now that we're up to speed, let's get into how a Lethal Company movie could work. The theming and atmosphere will be the most essential key to keeping people interested the whole way through the production. Since Lethal Company is a game built around extraterrestrial psychological horror, it would be only logical to retain that theme for a movie. The journal logs in the ship are our only concrete clues to a mysterious and somewhat disturbing plot. The monsters all have separate mechanics that test the player's various senses of paranoia and survival skills. They all even tear apart the players in different ways should they get caught. The monsters, being a rather big part of the game, would need an equally large part of the plot in the movie to help keep the atmosphere under control. All these depressing and terror-inducing ideals could combine together to make an experience meant for adult audiences. It would make far less sense for a production like this to be one that panders to a younger audience, plus it can't make the same critical mistake Five Nights at Freddy's did. It would be easier to make viewers feel the dread of the crew by keeping its atmosphere up throughout the whole movie and keeping sympathetic or quiet moments to an absolute minimum, and instead keeping the atmosphere almost perpetually dark and tense. However, the atmosphere may also have to contrast from the original formula a bit too. The game takes a graphics approach that may confuse non-gaming moviegoers. It blends together old-school pixel art and low-poly aesthetics with modern-day effects. In short, it would look comparatively low in rendering next to other games. Even though this was intentional and helps with the game's atmosphere, they may have to upgrade to cutting-edge effects and over-the-top realistic lighting and effects to appease modern-day moviegoers, as otherwise they may dismiss it as something low-budget and low-quality. This would apply if it was animated or live action. Zeekers, despite being a former Roblox content creator, did not necessarily market this game for younger audiences, and instead older teens and adults. So with a consistent, more mature tone, most if not all the way through, the theme and atmosphere of the game can be portrayed more brilliantly and accurate on a silver screen. The only confirmed characters we have in Lethal Company's lore are a group of 4 through Sigurd's logs on the ship's computer. These individuals were known as Sigurd, Richard, Desmond, and Jess. Most of their story has already been told after collecting all the logs from the various planets. Even if we already have a full group of 4 who can be our main cast, I do not believe this is the right move. Most of their moves are made to prepare future crews to embrace their fate in the most comfortable way. They also spend a lot of time supposedly gearing up to destroy the company after discovering their ill intent, whatever it may be. But it continues the way the game potentially played out. They came close, but ultimately failed. Sigurd and his crew's story is spoken for. I believe a new cast of characters would be the better way to go. The protagonist would likely have to build upon what Sigurd started, someone who knew him at some point. Perhaps a descendant, a son, or a grandson. The amount of allotted time in between Sigurd and when the players work is around 5 to 6 centuries, so the line can go back even further, but I figure the closer the line is to Sigurd himself, the more motivated the protagonist will be. He also needs to be an honorable figure to be a protagonist, not a victim, not a mentally unstable person, and not an anti-hero, so basically none of the newer YouTube or Prime show protagonists. It has to be someone with 100% good intent, someone that audiences will actually root for. He can be a rather independent character who in time will realize he has to rely on his teammates if he wants to survive, providing a good character arc to go with the otherwise simple "how did my parent die" prompt. The deuteragonists, one way or another, will have to be the other crewmates. It would be best if they were all new employees, so they're all equally as paranoid. We need a best friend character, someone who helps keep the protagonist going. However, I do not believe he should be there at the start of the crew. He could be a breath of fresh air. Besides, we need other characters to die, one of the essential laws of a horror movie. The initial sacrifice role could be there before the best friend character is. The sacrifice role could be someone the audience won't be that sympathetic for, and one who argues with his crewmates. He could be left behind at some point unknowingly during the first quota, hunted by monsters, and inevitably dies before his body is sold to the company on the final day of the first quota. It could also send a wave of distress through the other crewmates that they really need to look after each other. The best friend character then becomes the fourth member of the crew as a replacement, and he stays there for the rest of the production. Even though we have a sacrifice role now for a character who supposedly acts snarky to no end, that doesn't mean we can't have another sacrifice role. The more deaths in a horror movie, the more despair it puts into the atmosphere after all. This time, let's make it a nicer character, perhaps one the audience could sympathize with. So a quiet, honest, but perhaps somewhat psychotic, hence the sympathize part. He could die much later in the feature after having lots of screen time as the essential third main character. And finally, the last crewmate. I just spent a lot of time grilling on how we need to avoid less serious matters, but the line may need to be crossed at some point. If all else fails, this final character could be indirect comedy relief, a character that, no matter what, the audience will love. A blunt character who could comply with his crewmates, but hardly speaks, and gets a badass moment of some kind, maybe even a fake death. Just to make things easier for later segments in this video, let's just go with these temporary names I made. For the protagonist, Sigurd Jr. For the snarky sacrifice, Reggie. For the right-hand man, Tom. For the kind but troubled, Barry. And for the blunt strong one, Dylan. Monsters are the primary thing players want to avoid in Lethal Company, so this will make them the initial antagonists in the production. Most of them are described as essential wildlife to the moons they inhabit, so they won't act as primary obstacles most of the time. Some fan favorites, or generally more dangerous monsters, may get more screen time, such as coilheads and brackens. But there are some monsters that can be treated as more complex characters, as they have a lot more of a reputation amongst players and the game's lore, having little to no scientific record in Sigurd's logs. The easiest monster to translate to an actual character is the Ghost Girl, the only humanoid creature you have to look out for. In the game, the Ghost Girl decides to haunt a player, and only that player can see and hear her. After a few quick appearances, she will skip at high speeds towards said player and decapitate the player upon contact. She can have a little more depth than that in a production, especially since a guaranteed female lead is still needed. Actually, needed is a very strong word, more like advised, we don't go by Hollywood's guidelines. Being a deceased individual, she could probably know what's going on and want retribution. Perhaps her hostility could be misdirected. We could have her actually interact and help one of the crew out, and eventually lose it and try to kill another one. The Jester is another one that could easily receive more screen time and depth. The Jester is one of the more mysterious monsters. It normally walks around in a passive state, but will eventually start winding its music box. After around 40 seconds of winding, a giant skullhead pops out and will begin hunting every last person in the facility. It's easily the most deadly and the most fastest creature in the game. The fact that it has no record gives a little bit more creative liberty. It would be simple to just pit the Jester as the central antagonist, but I do not believe it could carry enough plot lines to have that much complexity. The central antagonist could more easily be the company. Their unfair and cruel treatment of their employees, the uncertainty of what exactly they're doing with all these scraps, what is really being contained within those walls. Plus, the whole story still centers around them anyway, so they have to have a major character line anyway. As an added bonus, there are still many opportunities for side characters. There could be an older character who's part of another crew but knew Sigurd before reassigned. The amount of things he's seen, he's not even fazed when one of his rookie teammates hits the bell too many times. Oof. The masked mimics could also be treated as side characters instead of mere monsters. Due to them not having a log entry, much less of a record, perhaps they would want to keep it off the books. After turning in Reggie's dead body, the company could turn it into a masked mimic in a later segment. This could be treated as a more freaky character, especially if a character we once knew is now trying to kill the main characters against his will, and the mere thought that the company would do something like this to top it all off. As I stated previously, there are 8 moons in Lethal Company, 3 desert-filled, 2 forested, and 3 snow-covered. If all these planets were to be covered in the production, then it would likely have to cover 3 quotas, with a day to spare, which could also fit each act respectively. In the event that a happy ending is needed, they need a massive item, and not one that can be ordered from the delivery pod. The Drill Sigurd's crew setup would likely be broken at some point in the spirit of irony and hopelessness. So what's the really big trigger item? The apparatus. This is a bit of fan service and pandering in this case to the modded community. For the most part, the modded community is a very talented group of content creators and has been acknowledged and enjoyed by many other influencers on the platform. One such mod enacts something that could cause more intensity than an apparatus does when it's normally removed. The Facility Meltdown mod causes the entire planet to begin to self-destruct as all hell breaks loose. This could cause chaos once pulled and then become the hidden ultimate weapon in the face of the company after a betrayal. Even if Blumhouse is continually making a name for themselves in the horror department, they're not as known for sci-fi as they are horror, or in between really. 20th Century Fox made the iconic Alien franchise, which qualifies it as a worthy choice, but again, like Blumhouse, they aren't known for much else in that department. Universal would likely be the best window of opportunity, and they have more than enough experience in every field of horror. But the best choice for a studio is most likely going to be Paramount Productions, as they have a much more recent streak of sci-fi thrillers. The casting for both actors and crew would end up being all over the place. It all depends on the budget, if it will rake in some professionals, or have to handpick some talented people on YouTube, or something like that. Some of these picks may seem far-fetched. I tried to stretch across all categories of budget, and they have been specifically picked because of past performances and or hopeful potential. For Sigurd Jr., the protagonist, I chose Robbie Amell, primarily for his roles in Code 8 and Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. He has experience as this kind of character in this kind of setting. Though he has never been to space yet, he certainly has the skill set. For Tom, I chose Miles Teller. He actually has more experience than Amell in this particular field, but I still believe he would be better as a secondary character. For Barry, I chose Benedict Samuel. A relatively newer face in the horror genre, could fit a more psychotic supporting character and prevail in parts where Amell and Teller have played little to none. For Dylan, I chose Adam Driver. A bit more of a stretch considering Driver is a lot more of a high-profile actor, but through the more serious roles he is given, I think he can actually pull this off. For Reggie, I chose Brandon Routh. Perhaps the biggest wildcard of the cast, but he can be insubordinate and reckless. Someone who thinks he knows what he's doing, but he actually doesn't. He hasn't really done a running scared part in any of his movies, but that can easily change. For the Ghost Girl, I chose Piper Rubio. You should know why. Five Nights at Freddy's. Even though I told myself many times while making this video, we are not going to go there and do the obvious and pander to strange internet trends. But what's worse? Pandering to the FNAF fanbase, or pandering to the Ortega fanbase? It was actually a really hard choice. In the end, I chose Rubio. She could use another lead role in a horror film. For the company, or more accurately named the voice of the company, I chose Yahya Abdul-Mateen. He could be authoritative, he could be relentless, and he could be over-the-top creepy. And now let's bring in a few side characters. First, let's bring in an older character who worked with Sigurd for past quotas but was reassigned to another crew before Sigurd went missing. His name is Hudson. Now, if this is a smaller character, this would be a perfect time to throw in a cameo. If we wanted another pander character, we could try Mythzan, who is one of the bigger YouTubers in the Lethal Company community. If we wanted a more prominent person, not just on the internet, an option could be George Clooney. Even though he has a history with space movies, he doesn't have that much experience with horror, so being reduced to a role with a few minor interactions would be ideal. And the final selection of the notable cast, Sigurd himself. I went back and forth on this one because it could be another cameo with very few lines. Sam Neill was the first thought that came to mind. Even though he's older, he could be just the right thing because Sigurd is meant to be an older character if we follow the story of his son. So now we have a prime cast. Now let's discuss a few crew choices. For the composer, I chose Tim Hecker. His score for Infinity Pool proves he could be just right for the job. It gives you a feeling of dread and isolation, which could help create a captivating, intense atmosphere. You've actually been listening to that soundtrack this whole video. My choice for the cinematography and screenplay may seem weird, but bear with me. There are a lot of incredible, talented screenplay writers, but even after all their qualifications, I believe someone less obvious is better for the job. This YouTuber, Gibson TV, is an incredibly gifted and high-quality content creator who has done his fair share of Lethal Company content next to all his amazing cinematic trailers. His work is very inspiring and even convinced me to make this whole video in the first place. I think there is no better fit for a screenplay. Heck, go check out his channel afterwards and see for yourself. And the final main choice for now is the director. Now, the obvious choice would probably be Zeeker's, as he developed the groundbreaking game in the first place, so if there was an official production, he'd probably like to have a solid grip on something that is rightfully his after all. I think he'd be better off as a writer and producer, however, but that doesn't mean he can't oversee and approve operations anyway. So for a director, I chose Jonathan Glazer. He could capture the monster's fierce guarding of their worlds and the terror the team unknowingly walk into along the way. He has directed and screenwritten a number, granted it's a limited number, but an amount all the same, of horror features. So if he ends up doing it right, he could actually give Ridley Scott a run for his money. Now the ultimate question before I discuss the plotline. Which format and media form would be more convenient for this Lethal Company production? A couple episodes on a television show, or a full-length feature film? A TV show would allow for a more laid out and potentially slower tale, but more content could be added. A movie has more potential for income and can tell a more direct story. I mean, I literally called this video a movie pitch. If more stuff is added to the game, which eventually will happen, there actually isn't a disadvantage for either. A TV show could elaborate on every single change more, but a movie could do just as well with a sequel. One disadvantage a movie has is a limited runtime, which could mean a few of the moons getting scrapped from the final version of the film, while a TV show could easily just use all 8 of them. A TV series could be a little more out of control with the narrative in contrast, which could be really good or bad. It all depends on what the rest of the crew and extras are, and it would require more time to make than a movie. I think for the sake of limited time and a chance at larger income, a movie would make more sense. But if later additions to the game were to change things drastically, perhaps a TV show would be in order afterwards. I doubt there would be enough new content for a full-blown sequel to a film. But if a movie does good, it's more than likely to receive a sequel anyways. Even with all the things piled up, I doubt Lethal Company could go past one TV season without becoming almost full-blown fan service. So yeah, perhaps the answer is a bit of both. A film in cinemas, and then a one-season TV show to cover future content released in the game, if it's that good. So after prolonging the actual pitch for so long and putting so many usable elements on the table, let's now tie them all together and make an actual storyline. It starts with the flickering lights in the ship, as Sigurd's crew scrambles to get the technology under control as they begin a landing sequence on a blizzarding moon. There's a lot of bickering and desperation. We see Rich, Desmond, and Jess sneaking past dogs, and as they enter the facility, Sigurd boots up the walkie-talkie and the cameras. And then the opening credits scroll as the following events unfold. The opening credits would show Sigurd's crew exploring the facility and getting picked off one by one, as he stays in the ship checking on them and writing the logs. After realizing he's alone, he collects the bodies and scrap while escaping the outside monsters. He desperately tries to sell all he can to the company, but falls short of the quota. The credits end with Sigurd being ejected into space, and as the camera zooms into space, like it does in the game, we see the name appear, Star Wars-like, Lethal Company. We then switch to a training facility. Faces are obscured the whole time. They are doing timed training exercises. He is interfered with by other trainees but outdoes them. After succeeding, he's called out of the area and later informed he got the job and would report for duty immediately. He's given a syringe before he can resist and wakes up in a lit up tunnel. He begins to get into the iconic orange spacesuit and departs into the cloud-covered sky of 71 Gordian, the company building. He reads a slip in his pocket and walks across the cargo-filled area to the designated area. He meets Barry, Dylan, and Reggie. They are skeptical of each other right now and confused. Several lights turn on and reveal the ship. A loudspeaker comes on and begins the company intro speech.
Welcome to your first day on the job. This is your very own autopilot ship, where you will eat and sleep for the duration of your contract.
Alright, after hearing the whole spiel, they slowly get into the ship and take off. Since it does get harder as they go, it would be logical to visit the planets in a chronological order. So with that mindset, the first moon is experimentation. They encounter the seemingly harmless spore lizard, which lowers their guard. A snare flea drops onto Barry's head, and being the pretty psychotic person he is, he runs around many times and eventually stumbles out the door, gasping for breath. He then sees the flea dead on the ground next to him. He then realizes they must be safe outside as the atmospheric conditions of the planet cannot sustain certain life forms, and that's why they stay inside the facility. On the way back, Sigurd Jr. warns them of something big. As they frantically look around, they move, and as all sounds stop, an Earth Leviathan erupts from the ground as it comes back down towards the ground. Reggie, Barry, and Dylan frantically run back to the ship as it burrows back in the ground, and then they take off. Up to this point, Reggie has already proved to be a bit more stubborn than the others, and while back in orbit, questions the real reasons and motives to Sigurd Jr.'s commitment and begin to argue. Before it could get physical, Dylan breaks up the fight. The group agreed that the last map was probably too dangerous and wanted to go to a new planet, so day 2 is the next map up, Assurance. To throw in the different dangers monsters and the environment can pose, perhaps weather could be thrown in, starting with something rather harmless, rain. Dylan could have a quick experience in quicksand before being pulled out by Barry. As they're emptying out, Sigurd Jr. begins to read one of his father's logs. He then claims something is sneaking up on Reggie. When he turns around, there's nothing there. Annoyed but convinced, Reggie then went and peeked around the corner as instructed and saw a hoarding bug. Barry came across the landmine and was begging for Sigurd to turn it off. Annoyed, Reggie turned off his walkie-talkie. Barry eventually got out and caught up with Dylan, who was carrying stuff back to the ship already. Sigurd is frantically trying to warn Reggie about a turret, but Reggie's walkie is off. Reggie takes a bullet to the arm and can't pick up his walkie anymore. Sigurd leaves after Barry asks if he can give Dylan a hand with the stuff. Reggie wanders even further into the facility, eventually finding an obscure coil head and bunker spider. After running, he locks the door behind him, and even though it's bashed severely, they cannot get through. Reggie sees a fire exit in the room he's in and is relieved. He leans his broken body against the dark corner of a room as he exhales in relief. We then see he actually just leaned into a bracken, as we see it turn its head and see its eyes. The other three get back to the ship with the rest of the loot and look on the cameras to see Reggie's body getting dragged away. As they attempt to teleport his body, the bracken is dragging him so intensely that the head is ripped clean off when the rest of the body is teleported. Absolutely horrified at what they saw, the three panic and leave Assurance, realizing they had enough loot and were in complete distress at what happened. They headed back to 71 Gordian a day early to meet the profit quota and beg for a new crewmate. When the ship lands, the company is not happy that Reggie is dead and orders to dispose of the body. A new crewmate would be provided. This is Tom's entrance. Right off the bat, he's presented as a much better character than Reggie was. As they leave, they quickly explain the situation and Tom catches on quickly. They then realize their quota has increased. While angry and distraught, Tom manages to calm everyone down and get them in a mindset to tackle the quota like a mission. Cue the transition music. Val and offense are cleared in a montage. The crew does a much better job, and we see Tom try to convince Sigurd Jr. to go into the facility with them, but he refuses. Gaps are jumped, valves are fixed, loot is brought back to the ship in droves, beehives are collected, the bridge on Val doesn't collapse. Another Leviathan is avoided on offense. Dylan comes across another snare flea and beats it with a stop sign, and it looks like they're doing a lot better. Final day of the second quota. They land on March, which is stormy. Tom tries to reason with Sigurd Jr. again as he tries to rearrange the tapes. Jr. finally agrees and goes in with Tom. Dylan tells them to back away from the loot as they wait for a lightning bolt to hit the metal scrap. After it struck, Dylan continued bringing stuff back to the ship. Barry hears continuous noises in the darkness, but decides to ignore them and keep searching. It continues until eventually he drops his V8 engine and frantically uses the flashlight. After turning for a while, he comes face to face with the ghost girl. Barry immediately panics and tries to run. As he backs into a corner, he waits for the worst, and then he hears the sound of the V8 engine getting dropped at his feet. He and the ghost girl stare at each other before the ghost girl finally speaks up. She's grateful as no one has been able to see her for a long time, and explains what happened to these planets. After a while of talking, Barry calms down. He gets out of the corner and picks up the engine, and realizes that Junior and Tom found him and were very concerned. As they question him, Barry starts to act up again and points behind them. All three of them glimpse another Bracken. Sigurd remembers that this is the same kind of monster who killed Reggie, and it becomes a terrifying dash to the exit. Outside, they are surrounded by baboon hawks, who are then devoured by eyeless dogs. When they make it back to the ship, Dylan is just sitting at the control unit, not even phased. As he pulls the lever, he burns the dogs as they fly away. They then go back to the company building to pay off their second quota, as they had 0 days left. After unscrambling more of his father's logs, Junior thought he could find more answers on Titan, which was his father's last recorded whereabouts before he went missing. He begged his crew to allow him to buy more jet fuel so they can get there. They agreed. As they head to the delivery pod, Hudson shows up. His crew is unloading a ship further down the way. He recognizes Junior's voice, saying he sounded like his father. After an acquaintance, Hudson reveals a little background information on the drill and everything else Junior did not previously know about his father, some bold and some traumatic details, and doubting the true purpose of the company. Right as Hudson's crewmate goes to fetch him, he realizes that Junior didn't know his father's fate. He informs him that as he last left, the ship reportedly came back empty. Junior does not believe Hudson, and the two depart on a rather depressing note. As the crew takes off, the quota increases again. Sigurd Jr. begins to get real mad at the rumors, while Tom continues to try to convince Barry he did not see a little girl in a red dress. Dylan then drops some terrible news. They do not have enough fuel to reach Titan. They land on Rend and attempt to empty the chemical jugs into the engine, hoping it would give them the fuel they needed. Rend is also eclipsed at this time. Dylan stays behind to repair the engine and insert the chemicals. Inside the facility, they are confronted by a coal tank. Barry is off like a shot, leaving Junior and Tom to handle it. Barry gets lost and gets startled by the ghost girl again. She's a little more playful this time, as she sees Barry as a friend now. Barry also feels more comfortable this time around. The ghost girl reveals more details about the company and her past. Barry promised to avenge the girl's death. She disappeared and revealed the fire exit for Barry to escape. As Dylan guides Barry through the fog, even more coil heads show up to torment Junior and Tom, with a total of 5 of them. They eventually make it out, and they hear Barry whisper to the walkie that there was something big outside the ship. Junior is grabbed by it and almost eaten, but is dropped after being hit by a stun grenade. As they try to fly away, the giant grabs the ship and tries to pull it back. They grab shovels and attempt to beat his fingers. It does not work. Dylan uses the last of the chemical jugs and pours it into his mouth, making the giant let go. Confident that the shovels would eventually do the job, Junior is furious at what Dylan did. Dylan backed away and Tom tried to calm Junior down. They were forced to land on another moon and look for more fuel, with no other options. This moon was called Dime. Barry stays in the ship this time, as Tom suggested Dylan needed to extract fuel from sources. Junior continues to wonder if Hudson was right. Tom tries a more imposing approach, as Junior's search to uncover his father's past has now driven this entire operation, endangering his crewmates for no real profit, and missing the point regardless of who killed his father. The company is the one to blame. As those words echo through his mind, he gets into a disagreement with another hoarding bug. It takes the item, enraging Junior. He chases him back to his den, where the loot bug was apparently raising a family of his own. As Junior beats them mercilessly, Barry eventually finds Junior, pins him down, and forces the shovel out of his hand. The ghost girl who is watching glares, blaming Junior, and leaves. The reality quickly set in on what he was doing. As he tried desperately to recompose himself, he then admits that even though the company is cruel, they can't be evil enough to murder their own employees. No one would be that vile. Barry continued to hold the shovel and told Junior to just leave the bugs to their scrap and leave. Once everyone's back, they are just silent at the display Sigurd showed. As they take off, Tom pointed to Sigurd's last entry, which apparently remained unfinished, and it was about leaving the employee who submitted themselves to their own physical and mental torture, and how the drill was meant to destroy the company and whatever is in it. But halfway through it, the log just trails off, unfinished. Moments later, the company pointed out that they missed the quota, shortened it to 2 days. The ship doors open, and the four of them hold on for dear life, but eventually Barry's grip slips and he is plunged into the deep reaches of space. Eventually the doors shut. The reality finally sinking in to all three of them, especially Junior. The ship was already on course to leave for Titan. The group regather their bearings. Junior accepts the truth and agrees to move on from the past and do what's best for him and his crewmates, not just himself. They all agreed to destroy the company by finishing the drill. All they needed was a power source, an apparatus. They destroyed every tracker and beacon on the ship and their suits. This was not about the job anymore. They were free from their essential blood contract and were ready for revenge. As they land on Titan, all three of them leave into the facility this time. They find a bracket and beat it back. We hear the company voice speaking in the darkness to an unknown creature, saying the ship went off the radar and they could be there. They know too much. Finish the job. Then we see the silhouette of legs walking towards the light. As they're walking, Junior turns around and is attacked by the ghost girl. After being flung against the wall, he passes out. Dylan and Tom, dumbfounded by what they see, immediately try to get him back up. Dylan scans the area and said the apparatus was close, and he walks toward it. In his head, Junior enters a twisted version of the facility. We switch back to Dylan, who is being followed by the legs from before. Dylan finds and pulls the apparatus and immediately feels the ground rumbling. The facility was about to melt down, and they had minutes to escape. Junior, in a warped world, comes face to face with the ghost girl, who is beyond fuming and demands to know where Barry is. Upon telling her what happened, she went crazy, and monsters started coming at him from every side. Junior raced past thumpers, coil heads, body sacks, spring corpses, suffocated bodies, all while the ghost girl skipped towards him, screaming at Junior the entire way through. He crawls to a corner, bleeding from multiple gashes, and at the last moment tries to remind her that the company put them through all of this and how they intended to get payback and retribution. After a bit of going back and forth, Junior feels sympathetic for the ghost girl, knowing that their dilemmas and destinies were not so different. The girl disappears, and Junior wakes back up. Tom is incredibly relieved. But then they hear Dylan yelling down the hallway. He finally reappears, apparatus in hand. He stops to catch his breath and points down the hallway. Following him was a currently docile jester. It starts winding. Even as they run, the music gets louder. Eventually it pops out and causes them to take an alternate route to try to lose it. As they close the door, it bursts right through the wall. They eventually make it out and jump down to the ground halfway down the stairs to get away from the jester. They fly away and see the jester get wreathed in flame from the blast radius of the explosion. With the scraps secure, they set course back to the company building, ready to destroy everything. On 71 Gordian, the company was explaining to 4 new recruits that the last crew went missing. Their ship would be arriving shortly. When the ship arrives, the company is shocked to see Junior, Tom, and Dylan still alive. The company taunts them for Barry's loss and claims that they can't protect each other. They send out masked mimics to attack. 2 of the newer employees are attacked by the mimics and become just like them. The other 2 are supplied with signs and shovels to fight back. More come out. Junior notices the tag on one of the mimics said, Reggie, which terrifies him even more. The company, annoyed at the resistance, sends out nutcrackers. Tom is shot in the leg and finds himself cornered by mimics. Dylan is also quickly cornered. Junior attempts to move the apparatus to the drill, but the company spots him and slams a tentacle on the platform, collapsing the entire platform and the drill with it. Clinging onto the edge, the nutcracker's aiming at him. As he thinks it's over, the ghost girl appears and decapitates the 2 nutcrackers. Junior climbs back up and grabs the shotgun. The ghost girl refuses thanks from Junior and tells him to get back in the game. Junior comes flying out of the air with his shotgun and frees Dylan, who helps Tom to his feet. The new crewmates, inspired by what they saw, overpower the mimics and beat them down. The company claims they will not stop coming for them. Their number one priority now is delivering their lifeless corpses to the creature in their walls. Junior then remembers the apparatus was still on the catwalks. He asks Dylan his expertise on fuel. If the apparatus was a source to stop harmful nuclear energy, couldn't it also be a source of nuclear energy if it destabilizes? Not sure if that's how it works, but this is science fiction. So they create a small bomb and wire it to the V8 engine Barry found on Ren. The company curses them, but Dylan retorts all the insults, and the ghost girl appears and begins with a speech of her own. The company hears and spits back, and finally has enough. The tentacles fly all over the place and take the bomb with it. As they fly away, the entire building, and whatever was in it, is obliterated. They then speed off into the dark space, with a set course to a new moon. As the ship goes across the stars, the ending credits roll. And that is the movie pitch. No, there are some pretty evident flaws. For example, it could be a little out of place at times, and the climax doesn't just end once all the bad guys are dead. And I just know some people are gonna go, "The cast lacks diversity." I don't care about the woke, shut the hell. It really plays out more like a thriller, and only 2 characters of the main cast died. We know Sigurd and his crew all die in the end, and that would lead to an indefinite, hopeless story. But that also risks more edgy character arcs, and we do not need more of that in the horror universe. I left them going off into the reaches of space as an ending for interpretation. I think this could tie in as many elements as possible. A post-credits scene could also be in order to foreshadow a sequel or TV show, maybe something from future updates. Then again, most of the gripes are really just my opinion, but at least I'm self-conscious about the possible flaws in this version of the story. But hey, practice makes perfect, and there are many people out there who could come up with potentially better synopsises for a feature like this. Well, I've covered all the key points of detail and brainstorming, and that's my pitch for a Lethal Company movie. I really don't care if you subscribe or not, but if you enjoyed, please leave a like and comment. What are your ideas on a Lethal Company movie? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.